New Year's just happened, and here at Wild Heart we have the intention setting ceremony. Any of y'all come out to that? Just curious? Okay, nice. I can't really stay up that late anymore. My least favorite holiday, because I asked y'all, has been historically New Year's Eve, and closely followed by the 4th of July. And I feel like that's been in the past because I feel like there's a lot of pressure on that holiday for two things. There's kind of a pressure to be in the right place at the right time with the right person. Puts a lot of pressure on the moment, And I've spent many a New Year's Eve single, and it's kind of a bummer when you're hanging out with a bunch of friends and they've got their lover and you're just kind of standing in the corner like, all right, what's up? Cool. High five, Andrew. We made it through another year, right? So it's never been quite the most fun holiday for me. And then also I feel like it puts a lot of pressure on goal setting, and kind of this pressure to almost change a lot in ourselves and in our lives seemingly overnight, right? And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I found that through the Dharma, through this practice, a lot of what the Buddha is teaching, a lot of what I've uncovered for myself is that so much of my stress and suffering actually come from these two things. I'm trying to place a lot of expectations on the moment, either to have a better moment than I'm having right now, or to have a great moment later, or to just have a different moment than I'm having. Right? And it's like, noticed a lot of suffering created by trying to kind of change the moment that I'm in. And I've also noticed a lot of suffering and a lot of stress in my life around expectations on myself. Putting a lot of pressure on myself to, improve and to grow and to accomplish goals. And and I think that in our culture, I think that in the world, in the human condition as well, but I think especially in our culture, there's a lot of emphasis on self-improvement and goal setting. And I actually think that that's helpful, and it's also a cause of a lot of suffering. It's very subtle, my relationship to growth and change and self-improvement. It's very subtle. Because I want to grow, and I think that acknowledging the places that there's some shortcomings in my life, being intentional about these places, and staying focused on those areas of my life is really important. Because I've spent a lot of periods in my life where I've been pretty avoidant of some of these things. And so on one hand, I think it's really important in my experience to have goals. It's been important. But I found that there's always like a shadow side lurking underneath for me to goal setting. And it's approaching my goals from a lot of expectation. And, for example, I often don't really have my goal focused on the process. It's mostly on the outcome. Right? It's like this practice in the Buddhist teaching is he's not really interested a lot on the outcomes of our practice. He doesn't sit around and talk about enlightenment and awakening. And actually when people ask him about because that's the ultimate goal of Buddhism, right? You want to wake up, which means freedom from suffering. That sounds pretty cool. I want that. He doesn't really talk about that though. He talks about how to get that. Right? He talks about the process of showing up in each moment with wisdom and with compassion, and how to cultivate mindfulness, and how to live with generosity and live with our integrity. And so, I think that this practice has helped me a lot see the shadow side of goal setting and how often I'm focused on the outcome and not as engaged in maybe the process, the patience. It's a hard thing. I get stuck all the time. I forget that all the time. But if you need that at the beginning of this year, I wanted to offer that. It's just to remember to be patient and gentle with yourself and your process, right? Because we never really arrive. It's actually one of the tricks of the mind that causes a bunch of suffering, is once I get these problems about myself figured out, then I'll be happy. And the Buddha's noticing the subtle quality of our mind that always is telling us that once I get is where the suffering's created. This kind of, and that's what we're talking about with clinging, is this idea that someday you're going to be a better, more perfect version of yourself and you'll finally be happy. Right? And it's really subtle, because again, it's good to have goals, but it's also often the case that my self-improvement kind of functions from this basis of thinking that there's something wrong with me to begin with. You know? And so, you know, that's one way that I found that goal setting has this shadow side and this expectation. And another side is that I'm often comparing myself to either this perfect version or to other people. It's like I'm not even really clear a lot of the times, if I'm being completely honest with myself, is this my goal or is this a goal that I think I should have? You know, a lot of times, like the things that I'm trying to achieve or the qualities I'm trying to have are things that aren't, in my experience, really authentically who I am. You know, like when I came into this practice, they say there are two wings. Like people usually come into Buddhism through two doors. And it's an overgeneralization, but you get it. So one door is the wisdom door. You know, these people like learning about impermanence and dukkha and Buddhist psychology and clinging and all of this stuff. I'm one of those people. I'm a wisdom door person. And then there's this group of people that tend to come through the heart door, they say, through loving kindness and compassion and gratitude and equanimity. And I had an allergy towards the heart door when I first got here. I like understood it and I valued it. I was like, but the cool shit that the Buddha's talking about is like the 5 aggregates and dependent origination and the 4 noble truths. Like, it's kind of a psychologist, right? I'm interested in that stuff. And for the first couple years, my teachers would say, you know, it's the loving kindness and the heart, and they would kind of push me in that other direction, which was good for me. But I started to feel like, you know, I should be more, you know, heart-centered. And I really had this confused in my mind, and I didn't suffer a ton about it, but I almost felt like I needed to be a more sentimental person. I'm just not. I'm just not a very sentimental person. I love people. I like to hug. I like to tell people that I love them. You know, but I'm just not, this is just not in my conditioning. We've got to work with our conditioning, not against it. Or I've found at least that's been a little bit of an easier, softer way for me. So I don't know about you. I have my own theory. You can see for yourself. But my general theory is that there has to be, for me, some level of self-acceptance and general acceptance of where I'm at in my life before I really can attempt to change something in my life from a place that is more of an empathetic and understanding goal. Does that make sense? It's like I kind of feel like acceptance for me has to come first, and then I can start to change. And so I think for a lot of us, I noticed some nodding heads, that we feel this pressure of expectation around goals, and we compare ourselves to other people. We don't always set goals that we, you know, are really maybe our own, or ones that we think we should have. And one of the gifts that I learned to cultivate through this practice is curiosity, right? Rather than being outcome focused, is actually to be really curious about, you know, if I'm trying to change something in my life, well, I'm going to notice a lot of the opposite of that change. I'm going to notice a lot of the moments of reactivity. I'm going to notice a lot of the moments when I slip back into my habits. I'm going to notice the opposite of what I want a lot. And this practice has helped me to really be curious in these moments. And to see them as opportunities, they're actually the most important moment in changing habits and freeing ourselves from these cycles of stress and suffering in our lives, are these moments where we struggle. And being really curious, like when my alarm goes off and I don't want to get up and do my yoga practice or my meditation practice or go to the gym or whatever it may be, like notice what the quality of my mind is like in that moment without judgment. What's going on right here? This is really fascinating. And then I find the inner resistance. You know, even around my meditation practice, I had one of my wife's friends tell me, she asked me how I came into the Dharma and all this stuff, and she goes, "Oh, you're a reluctant yogi." She's like, "You don't really like meditating, do you?" I'm like, "No, not at all, actually." And she's like, "Oh, that's great." Right? And so it's like a lot of these things that I know will be good for me have come about out of necessity. Like I've kind of needed to make changes. And that's just been my experience. It's like, and I'm a therapist, and I see this all the time. You can come in day one and I can say, "What are your goals?" You can say X, Y, and Z. And then the whole rest of therapy is going to be about why you're not accomplishing your goals. Right? And so what this practice has taught me is to be curious and also to notice that it's not your goals that are important. It's all of this stuff that comes up around them. Right? And so I want to talk about this a little bit. Being less focused on the outcome of our goals and more intentional around how we show up in each moment. So what comes up around our goals? I think a lot of times what I notice is that when I want to change something in my life, the thing that I want to change has been serving me in some way. You know, I get something out of it. Even when I get upset and raise my voice with my daughter. It's like, I know that I don't value that. I don't want to do that. But y'all, 4-year-olds are very persistent. And like, I tried 30 times to parent in the way that I feel like I should parent. And I did a really good job those 30 times, but she has a 31 in her. She has a 32 in her. Like, she can go to 50. She can go to 100. And I know that about her, and so I feel like in this moment, it's not a rational thought, like, the only thing that's going to change is to raise my voice. And then I feel regret. And then if I'm not careful, I'll beat up on myself. And then if I'm not careful, I'll tell this whole story about how I'm never going to change and come up with all these reasons why I'm angry and blow things out of proportion, right? It's like, or I could just be really curious in that moment of, wow, she's really persistent. I'm fucking pissed off. Like, none of my friends or coworkers, like, no one in the world would treat me that way. She's 4. But no one in my life would treat me that way. I just got you food and your water, and then you wanted chocolate milk. I got you chocolate milk, and then I, gave you a hug, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry you're sad. I can see that you're frustrated right now." And just yelling and yelling and yelling, right? So to be really curious and to almost have that willingness to embrace, like I said, acceptance comes before change, and be like, this is really hard right now. Right now, it's like this. I am pissed off. And it helps me, I think, in a way to have a little bit more space to choose how I respond in the moment, right? Like awareness kind of gives us a little bit of power. And it's not always good news to be aware. It's not always an easy moment, but it kind of diffuses a little bit of not taking it so personally, not getting so caught up in the urgency of it. If we can spot it, we don't have to be it a lot of the time. At least gives us a little bit of an opportunity. And so the Buddha in his teaching encourages us to be less focused on the outcome and to be more interested in developing or kind of cultivating these internal qualities. And there's whole lists of them, actually. I was trying to kind of decide what list of these qualities, because there's so many. There's the 5 spiritual faculties, there's the 4 Brahmaviharas, there's the 10 perfections, there's, all of these lists of qualities. But the point is, I think that if I can have more confidence in putting my heart and my mind in the right place, then my communication is going to follow over time. Then my behavior is going to change over time. And this is kind of a radical idea in the Buddhist teaching, is that he says that intention is really the tip of our karma. He says whatever your mind thinks and ponders upon, becomes the habit pattern of your mind. And what happens in your heart and your mind, it comes out of your mouth and it comes out in your behavior. And if you can try to practice these qualities, I'll give you a list of some of them, of loving kindness, compassion, of generosity, of living with integrity, of truthfulness, of resolve. Patience is one of the 10 perfections in Buddhism, is patience. If you can try to kind of practice these things internally, I've found that it's easier to change my habits. It comes more naturally. So I think we get bogged down a lot, for me at least, around what's the right thing to do in the moment. A lot of the questions that come up in our spiritual community, which I'm glad that they come up, is well, what does the Buddha say about this? Or what should I do in this situation? What should I do in this scenario? And we're always kind of looking for the authority to tell us how to live. And one of the core things that the Buddha does is he kind of says, there's nothing out there that's going to save you from the suffering of your heart and your mind. And it's very empowering, but it also kind of sucks. Right? Is that you actually kind of have to figure it out yourself. But you get to. And he's trusting, he's actually saying that you actually have the potential to really free yourself from all of these habits of suffering in your life. And you don't have to look to anyone else to tell you what's right and wrong and good and bad. He says that if you really look, you know what's leading to your welfare and your happiness and what's leading to suffering. My clients, when they come into therapy, they already know. They tell me on the first session. So I have this story early in my recovery. I had a sponsor. I was 18 when I got clean. And that's just a part of my story. It's not everybody in Wild Heart is in sobriety, but a lot of us are. These reluctant yogis, right? Here we are. But when I first got clean, I had a sponsor, and that's kind of what they encouraged me to do, is to get a sponsor in the program. And, they would often say in 12-step meetings, just try to do the next right thing, and stay focused on a day at a time and just do the next right thing. And I really like the simplicity of that. Probably 90% of my problems could be solved with just staying present in the moment I'm in and doing my best to do the next right thing. Keep it simple. But my problem is I didn't know what the right thing was, because I was so fixated on always controlling the outcome. So I was well, I want to do this, or I could do this, but which one is going to give me the thing that I want the most? Right? And so it was this attachment, and that was driving a lot of my decisions. This fear. Am I going to do the right thing, or am I going to fuck it up like I always do? And so I called my sponsor one time, and I was hey, I forget what the situation was. Got the situation. And he was well, just take it a day at a time. Sounds like a really big thing. It's not going to get solved today, and just try to do the next right thing. I was well, I don't know what that is. And he said, well, just don't do the wrong thing. And that was really helpful, actually. I was like, cool, all right. I won't lie and I won't fuck this up and be mean and, I know how to not do the wrong thing. And it helped me really recognize that so much of what's going to happen next or what will this mean, in the future, so much of that is outside of my control, right? And I had to start practicing letting go. And this was hard as an atheist at 18 coming into the into the 12-step program because you could just turn it over to a higher power, and I didn't have a personal resonance with that. And Buddhism helped me to develop that. Is that faith to let go? Faith in what? Faith in it's an easier, softer way. It's a scary thing to try to let go, but that there's more freedom. There's more peace available than trying to fix, manage, and control things, right? So in the Buddhist teachings, there is kind of a next right thing practice. And it's not about a list of commandments or rules or anything like that. It's actually these intentions that we want to guide our heart. And the intentions, traditionally when they're taught, are renunciation, loving kindness, and compassion. So when you're looking at the Eightfold Path, the three intentions we want to cultivate are renunciation, loving kindness, and compassion. But if you break it down, it's really two things. And the first I want to talk about is non-attachment, which is the basis of renunciation. So if we look at like New Year's Eve, one of the things that we do a lot is historically we want to change habits in our life, right? It's like we want to either start new habits or stop old habits. And I think some very common ones are stop drinking or using drugs of some form, right? Or maybe something around food, and to go to the gym and exercise more, right? And there's nothing wrong with these at all. But I just wanted to point out that I think this time of year, we actually really automatically try to practice around renunciation. It's like letting go of some things that aren't serving us in our lives. And I think we can see it's often the case we start to develop these habits in the first place, like I was saying before, because they serve some purpose. So it's like, there's nothing wrong with, morally, I don't believe, alcohol. I don't believe, my wife has helped me learn this and teach me this even more, that there are good foods and bad foods. I don't believe that I don't want to just live in a world where things are good and bad or right and wrong. If I enjoy eating a donut, there's some goodness to it. I like it. That's a pretty important checkbox for eating food, right? So I've learned to try to step away from this kind of, as hard as it is, this right and wrong and good and bad around things, but to really look at what is my relationship to the habit, right? And one of the first things I see is that it is often serving some emotional need. So it's not the thing, it's just the need that thing's fulfilling. And so if I'm going to let go of that habit or practice renunciation, we've got to, again, practice acceptance before we practice change, and maybe have some empathy and understanding that it's not going to be that easy. Right? It's not going to be that easy, because then what do you do at that hour from 7 to 10 where you usually did that thing? Right? Or what do you do when your alarm bell goes off in the morning and you don't want to wake up? Or if one of your goals is to meet more people and socialize more, we have to deal with the fear and the insecurity and the self-worth. If you get really deep, it goes into feeling like a burden and not wanting to be rejected, and all of these things that get in the way of us doing the things that we know are good for us are often fears, and they're fears of the unknown. And we'd have to deal with all this shit in order to change. So it's not about the thing. It's much deeper than that. It's our fears around the unknown that keeps us in the habit. That's been my experience. or fears about my worth, or so on and so forth. So when we practice renunciation, I think it's important to really start with curiosity and self-compassion. And to be like, all right, Andrew, it's going to be a long road, dude. It's going to suck. And that's okay. You're going to want to do that old thing. You're going to want to, fall back into the old pattern, and that's okay. Bhikkhu Bodhi says, he's talking about changing habits, the problem arises of how we break the shackles of our habits. The Buddha does not offer as a solution the method of repression, which is the attempt to drive the urges away with a mind full of fear and loathing. This approach does not resolve the problem, but only pushes it below the surface where it continues to thrive. The tool the Buddha holds out to free the mind from these habits is understanding. Real renunciation, or real letting go, is not a matter of compelling yourself to give something up that you inwardly cherish, but changing your perspective on it so it no longer binds you. When we understand the nature of suffering around our habits, then we'll investigate it closely with keen attention. And when you investigate it with keen attention and understand why it's there, suffering will fall away all by itself, and the habit will change without the need for struggle. So our habits bring us comfort, but they also keep us in this unsatisfying loop. Ajahn Chah says there's two types of suffering. There's the suffering that creates more suffering and the suffering that leads to less suffering. There's the discomfort of doing what you're already doing, and then there's the discomfort of doing something different. He says that if you're unwilling to do the second kind, you're sure to repeat the first. And so the suffering of doing the same thing is a worse suffering. But either way, there's pain, there's discomfort, and we got to understand that. Underneath all these habits and all these New Year's resolutions that we set, there's usually some fear, some discomfort that's lurking, and we should feel grateful for ourselves for even giving a shit, despite the outcome of our goals being met. And if you wake up every day and just try to give a shit still, you're doing something really important. My first meditation teacher said, if all you do while you're meditating is try to be more kind to yourself, then you're doing it right. So it doesn't matter if your mind's still. It doesn't matter if you accomplish what you think meditation is supposed to accomplish. If we try to bring this intention of kindness and compassion to ourselves, our life is going to get better. That's been my experience. And we usually live this in reverse when we're stuck in self-improvement. We think that once I get the change, then I'll love myself more. And we do it backwards. And then we reinforce this belief that our love's conditional. And then the worst thing that can happen is you can make the change, and then you can believe that it's because you accomplished that thing or did that thing that you're worthy. And so we got to start with loving ourselves into being a better person. We've never hated ourselves into being a better version of ourselves. Easier said than done. We sit down and the mind refuses, and we say, all right, I'm just going to sit here on the park bench next to all these parts of me that believe I'm not worthy, not deserving, are cynical, skeptical, and distrusting. I'm just going to sit here and at least have this conversation with this part of me. So lastly, just to kind of add to this brings us to this other piece of intention. There's renunciation, but there's also, and I've been talking about it this whole time, there's also compassion. Right? There's letting go and understanding that letting go brings up all of this stuff. But then there's also loving kindness and compassion and appreciative joy. These are the heart qualities in Buddhism called the Brahma Viharas. And these are really the intentions we want to try to lead our life with, moment to moment. And so I'll end with this. You have hundreds, maybe thousands of moments throughout the day to practice stepping out of whatever these habits of reactivity and suffering are. There's so many moments throughout the day to try to be kinder to yourself, or to let go of that obsession, or to, deal with your boredom and loneliness instead of texting the ex, or whatever your New Year's resolutions may be for healthier behaviors. You're going to have 100 or 1,000 opportunities through the day to try to work with that urge. And, remember that you're building up a muscle, right? Remember that it's not going to happen overnight. But remember that even one moment of practicing letting go, one moment of kindness towards yourself, one moment of refocusing yourself on what is maybe the suffering that is leading to less but is still hard for you, that's a really powerful moment. And if you're really struggling to break the habit or accomplish whatever the goal is, maybe take a moment to reflect on why it's so hard to change it. Like, maybe appreciate, this thing has been what I've done to you to instead not feel lonely. Or this has been my comfort. And maybe appreciate the food, or appreciate the, X that has been your source of comfort in those lonely moments of the night. Or appreciate the self-harm that has taken away the emotional pain with the physical pain. Appreciate all these things that we usually define as fucked up, and understand that they've been there to support you. And maybe it's been hard to say goodbye to them, and that's okay. So maybe we start with empathizing, and then we can start to shift our focus on being more kind towards ourselves and more compassionate with ourselves. And I mean, this is a big ask, I know, but maybe if you start there, maybe the habit will be easier to change.
What's up, y'all? Reverend Mikey Noshel here from Wild Heart Meditation Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks for checking us out. Do me a favor, please like and subscribe. And if you feel moved to leave a donation, you can do so at wildheartmeditationcenter.org or the Venmo link in the description. Peace and love.